Around 11:20 on the night of March 19, 2004, 17-year-old Brianna Maitland finished her shift at the Black Lantern Inn in Montgomery, Vermont. She walked outside toward her green 1985 Oldsmobile 88. Then she drove away alone. The journey ahead of her was short. Only a few miles separated the restaurant from where she was expected to spend the night. It was a familiar drive. She should have arrived within minutes, but Brianna never made it. Somewhere after leaving the Black Lantern Inn that night, Brianna Maitland disappeared. By the following morning, her car would be found in one of the strangest positions imaginable, but Brianna would be nowhere in sight, and everything that happened after she drove away remains unknown. The following day, Brianna's green Oldsmobile was discovered along Route 118. The car was not simply parked beside the road. It had been backed into the side of the Dutchburn House, an abandoned farmhouse not far from the Black Lantern Inn. The rear of the vehicle had punched into the aging wooden siding. A sheet of plywood that had once covered a broken window rested across the trunk. The scene was unusual, but there was no Brianna. Search teams would eventually comb the surrounding fields, wooded areas, and roadside ditches. They found no sign of her, and the car itself only deepened the mystery. Despite the damage, the Oldsmobile remained mechanically operable. Inside were belongings Brianna might reasonably have needed if she intended to go somewhere else: her ATM card, her eyeglasses, her contact lens case, her migraine medication. Nearby were loose coins, a water bottle, and a single unsmoked cigarette. And inside the vehicle were 2 unopened paychecks. There was no simple explanation for why Brianna was gone, while so many of her belongings remained behind. The car had been found, but the person who had driven it there had vanished. What happened next would become one of the most troubling aspects of the early investigation. When responding officers first encountered the Oldsmobile, they did not know that it belonged to a missing 17-year-old. At that moment, there was no established connection between the abandoned vehicle and a missing person investigation. The car appeared to be an abandoned crash along a rural Vermont highway. Officers photographed it. The vehicle was towed, and it was stored, but Brianna's family did not yet know that her car had already been found. Hours passed, then days. While her family searched for answers, one of the most important pieces of the mystery had already been removed from the location where it was discovered. 5 days later, investigators showed Brianna's mother a photograph of the abandoned Oldsmobile. She recognized it immediately. It was Brianna's car. By then, the original scene had already been disturbed by time, weather, traffic, and the removal of the vehicle. Whatever might have been present during those first crucial hours could no longer be examined under the same conditions. Those 5 days could never be recovered. And from that point forward, investigators faced an extraordinarily difficult problem. There was no confirmed crime scene. There was no body. There was no confirmed eyewitness who could explain what happened after Brianna left work. Investigators would have to reconstruct an event no one could clearly describe. And the timeline would become one of the most important pieces of the case. But there was another detail investigators would return to. Hours earlier, before Brianna ever left work, something had happened that her mother would remember. Earlier that afternoon, Brianna had been with her mother. The day should have been memorable for a very different reason. Brianna had recently been working toward greater independence, and that morning she had completed her GED examination. She and her mother spent part of the day together. But while leaving a local store, something changed. Brianna suddenly appeared unsettled. Her mother noticed it. Something Brianna had seen, heard, remembered, or experienced appeared to have affected her. But Brianna never explained what it was. There is no confirmed evidence establishing what caused the change in her demeanor, and there is no way to know whether that moment had anything to do with what happened later that night. At the time, it was simply an unusual moment during an otherwise ordinary afternoon. Only after Brianna disappeared would it take on greater significance. Around 3:30 that afternoon, Brianna was dropped at a friend's home. Before leaving, she wrote a brief, handwritten note. Later, she reported for work at the Black Lantern Inn. Nothing publicly known about her shift indicated what was about to happen. Then, at approximately 11:20 that night, she left and drove into an unanswered part of the timeline. During the early investigation, authorities had to consider a possibility that often arises in missing person cases involving teenagers. Had Brianna chosen to leave? Some circumstances initially made the question reasonable. The weeks before her disappearance had been difficult. Not long before March 19th, Brianna had been assaulted by a former friend. She suffered a broken nose and a concussion. Brianna also knew how to defend herself. She had trained in jiu-jitsu. At 17, she was trying to establish greater independence. She was not living full-time with her parents and had been staying with friends. Viewed individually, those details left open the possibility that Brianna might have decided to go somewhere without telling her family. But the closer investigators looked at the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, the more complicated that explanation became. On the morning she vanished, Brianna had completed her GED examination. She had spent time with her mother. She was thinking about college. She was thinking about independence, about her future. And then there was the car. Her ATM card remained behind. So did her glasses, her contact lens case, her medication, and 2 unopened paychecks. Money Brianna had earned. Money she never came back to collect. None of those details, individually, could completely rule out a voluntary disappearance. But together, they made the theory increasingly difficult to reconcile with what had been left behind. If Brianna had intentionally decided to begin a new life somewhere else, she had apparently done so without many of the things that could have helped her survive independently. Gradually, the investigation began looking in another direction. As investigators continued examining the circumstances surrounding Brianna's disappearance, the position of the Oldsmobile became increasingly important. Was it simply the result of an accident, or had someone wanted the car to be found exactly as it was? In 2007, an FBI bulletin acknowledged a possibility investigators had already begun considering. The abandoned vehicle may have been deliberately staged. If that possibility were true, the strange position of the Oldsmobile would not merely represent the place where Brianna's journey ended. It could represent an attempt to influence how the scene was interpreted. But proving that was another matter. Over the years, investigators followed numerous leads. Properties associated with suspected drug activity in the surrounding area were searched. Those searches did not produce publicly confirmed evidence directly connecting the locations to Brianna's disappearance. Then there was Atlantic City. In 2006, a woman resembling Brianna was reportedly seen inside a casino. For a family desperate for any indication that Brianna might still be alive, a possible sighting could not simply be ignored. Investigators examined the information, but the woman could never be confirmed as Brianna. Another theory emerged years later. Investigators considered whether convicted serial killer Israel Keyes might have been responsible. Keyes became the subject of scrutiny in numerous unsolved cases because of his extensive travel and deliberately concealed crimes. But after examining the available evidence, authorities publicly ruled him out in Brianna's case. Lead after lead was investigated. Some produced questions. Others ended in dead ends. None provided the answer investigators needed. Numerous theories remain. Perhaps Brianna encountered someone she knew after leaving work. Perhaps she crossed paths with a stranger. Perhaps something happened that investigators have never publicly identified. But theories are not evidence, and none of those possibilities has been proven. What investigators can establish remains remarkably limited. Brianna left the Black Lantern Inn at approximately 11:20 that night. Her Oldsmobile was discovered the following day, and after that, the evidence becomes silent. No confirmed sighting explains where Brianna went. No recovered remains reveal what happened. No publicly identified suspect provides the missing piece. Years became decades, but the central question remained exactly the same. What happened after Brianna drove away? More than 2 decades after Brianna Maitland disappeared, the investigation remains open. The Vermont State Police continue to investigate credible information connected to the case. Federal investigators have also supported efforts to determine what happened to Brianna. 2 decades later, no one has been charged, and no confirmed suspect has been publicly identified, but an old case is not necessarily a hopeless case. The forensic tools available to investigators today are far more advanced than those available in 2004. DNA analysis has improved. Digital forensic techniques have evolved. Investigative genetic genealogy has helped provide answers in cases that remained unresolved for decades. Evidence that once revealed nothing can sometimes be examined again, using technology that did not exist when it was first collected. And sometimes, the breakthrough does not come from technology. It comes from a person, a forgotten memory, a witness who remembers something differently years later, someone who finally decides to speak, a piece of information that once appeared insignificant, or evidence collected in 2004 that modern science can interpret in an entirely new way. One of those, one day, could provide the answer investigators and Brianna's family have been waiting for. Until then, the case remains open, and so does the question: where is Brianna Maitland? It is easy for an unsolved case to become defined by its mysteries: the abandoned farmhouse, the green Oldsmobile, the belongings scattered around it, the unexplained 5-day delay, the theories, the unanswered questions. But Brianna Maitland was more than the mystery surrounding her disappearance. She was 17 years old. She grew up near the Canadian border in Montgomery, Vermont. She was working toward independence. She had completed her GED. She was thinking about college. She had plans for what came next, and she had a family who loved her. For more than 2 decades, that family has lived without knowing what happened after Brianna drove away from work on March 19, 2004. Behind every unresolved missing person investigation is more than an evidence file. There is a person. There is a daughter. There is a family waiting for answers. There is a future interrupted. And there is a young woman whose story deserves to remain visible until the truth is finally known. Remember Brianna Maitland, 17 years old, missing since March 19, 2004.